Good day everyone, today we'll be taking a look at the Indonesian Revolution, aka the revolution that turns all of your villagers into Javanese spearmen and gives you the ability to build Cetbang cannon. This revolution is rather notable due to the effectiveness of the Cetbang cannon. The Cetbang cannon is an artillery piece that only costs 2 population but deals good damage, and it behaves a lot like a Japanese flaming arrow. However, it doesn't do bonus damage against enemy artillery. However, it is a very cost-effective tool against enemy infantry. Cetbang cannon is particularly useful for the Portuguese because it lets them increase the number of artillery pieces they have on the battlefield. Normally the Portuguese have to rely upon the high pop cost organ gun, or the high pop cost culverin, or the very high pop cost horse gun. However, by using some Cetbang cannons to replace a number of your conventional artillery, you can build a high artillery army without running up an insane pop cost yourself. Now that we've covered the super amazing and fantastic Cetbang cannon, let's have a look at your cards to see what other awesome amazing things you get when you go with the Indonesian Revolution as the Portuguese. First things first, we have the Javanese Spearmen. That's an infinite card. There's also a card that sends you 1 elephant, and from here on out, anytime you send a shipment, you get 1 elephant. Next up, we have our Infinite Revolutionaries card, followed by our Infinite Fort card, followed by our Cetbang Cannon card, which is also infinite, followed by your Woku Junk, which is like a galleon but builds mercenaries, and then we have the card that you send so that you can build citizens. With this revolution, it behaves a lot like your average gunline revolution, i.e. the Barbary Coast or Haiti, where it gives you a good number of Javanese spearmen that you can train for only food, which can act as a line in front of your artillery so that your artillery can take out the enemy without being cut down by their hussars. However, unlike the Barbary Coast, this revolution gives you access to a completely unique artillery piece, which can be used to cheaply take down the enemy. Also, you get a number of elephants with great HP, which can be used to soak up enemy fire. As long as you have a good source of food income as this revolution, you can continue the attack with waves and waves of Javanese spearmen. However, to effectively attack with these units, it's important to keep an eye on their stance. When they're in cover mode, they'll take half range damage, but they'll deal half as much damage, so sometimes it's advantageous to quickly switch them to range mode so that they can survive a barrage of enemy range fire, then switch them back to normal mode so that they can cut the enemy to pieces, or stab them to pieces, rather. Compared to normal pikemen, Javanese spearmen have the advantage of only costing food, which can't be overstated because in the late game, as you start to cut down most of the wood on the map, the only real source of wood you'll get is wood from your factory. Because if you try and buy it from the market, then you're going to have to pay exorbitant prices as the cost of buying wood goes up and up and up. So in the late game, building, say, a Spanish pikeman can actually get rather expensive, whereas building Javanese spearmen with the Indonesian Revolution is rather cheap. Just make sure you have all of your mill upgrades, because your revolutionaries cost food. After you send your assistantship card, they cost food as well, and of course, even your spearmen cost food. So for the 3 units that you'll be building a lot, you need food. However, you still want to have something creating gold as the Portuguese, because as great as your Javanese spearmen are at dealing with hussars or sieging down buildings, your key unit as the Portuguese will almost always be your caçadores, which you will naturally back up with artillery, such as your organ guns, or with this revolution, the Cetbang cannon. And when you're dealing with a very powerful enemy, it's important to have some Cetbang cannons, some caçadores, and then maybe a few forts if you have the shipments to send them. And after you send your elephant card, just a reminder that with each new shipment you'll be getting a new elephant, which is actually more helpful than you think, because these Sufi elephants don't cost any population. So by the late game, if you've kept them alive by healing them up, you could have a rather decent high HP force to deal with opponents that your infantry will have a hard time countering if said opponents, say, have a high range resistance. Against opponents that don't have a high range resistance, such as a good majority of the Aztec roster, or opponents that have a decent range resistance but not nearly enough hit points, like, say, the remainder of the Aztec roster, then your Caçador and Cetbang cannon combo will do just fine. Keep in mind that this revolution doesn't have access to the Gatling, so you'll be relying on your Cetbang cannons and your organ guns backed up by Castors to do your anti-infantry work. Cetbang cannons are also a great choice for attacking the enemy, because unlike most artillery, they don't have to constantly switch between moving and shooting. They're always ready to fire, and they always move at a decent rate, so they're great on the offense, whereas with other artillery, you would either have to slowly trundle them forward, or rapidly switch between mobile mode and firing mode. Whereas with the Cetbang cannon, as long as you have a few units around to keep them safe from enemy cavalry, they can be used to great effect on the offense, rapidly moving forward to shoot and fire, while your other units, whether they be Javanese spearmen or your Castadors, support to keep your Cetbang cannons free from enemy assault. Because while the cannons are nice, cheap, low pop, with a decent attack and great movement speed, they're also proverbial glass cannons in that if they take too much damage, they'll quickly fall apart. Unlike falconets, which by the time they become field guns, can take a little bit of punishment before they fall apart. And while the new units are great and all, don't neglect your Castadors, because your Castadors backed up by Cetbang cannons can do a heck of a lot of damage, especially when your cannons reach a proverbial critical mass, where any time that they fire, the whole battlefield turns into explosions. And since they only cost 2 pop, they only cost as much as a hussar. Like the Barbaric States Revolution, this is a revolution that does very well on naval maps, both because they have cards that you can send to improve your navy, such as your Woku junk card, and also they have a military that is in general very food heavy, which is good on naval maps because you can gather more food via fish. And you can protect your fishing ships by sending Woku junks, which are basically a mercenary version of a galleon, where once they get close to the shore, they can build certain mercenary units, as well as some of your Portuguese units. And since your Javanese spearmen have a decent amount of siege damage, if you pair those with your Cetbang cannons, then you can quickly clean up the enemy's base, using your Javanese spearmen and your Cetbang cannons to take down all the buildings. And if you need more Cetbang cannons, then you can just train more from your Woku junks if you have to, which is always a nice little touch. And that's the Indonesian Revolution. It gives you the superb Cetbang cannon, it lets you build most of your units off of food, and it can be a heck of a lot of fun to play. So go out there and have fun, because elephants make everything better.